By the end of 1961, the legend of Lenny Bruce was growing fast. The 34-year-old comic managed to beat drug charges in Philadelphia, but the law wasn't finished with Lenny Bruce, not by a long shot.
They made it impossible for him to work in the 60s. They arrested him in so many places and threatened the licenses of the clubs that he worked in.
We now present Lenny Bruce.
On October 4th, 1961, Lenny Bruce took the stage at a little San Francisco club called the Jazz Workshop. But Lenny's colorful comedy didn't go over well with off-duty police officers. Friend Grover Sales.
They came up to him after the performance and said, "You're under arrest for violating the obscenity code," and they took him to the station house.
A drug bust was one thing, but Lenny believed an obscenity charge violated his constitutional rights. A conviction could kill his career. Lenny retained San Francisco attorney Albert Bendick.
I was convinced that we were dealing with somebody who was in no sense a pornographer and in no sense obscene, and who was a serious artist and a satirist and a moralist.
Lenny's San Francisco obscenity trial began on March 5th, 1962. 3 days later, reluctant jurors returned with a verdict.
The court is adjourned.
They said they had wanted to convict, but under the instructions and under the law, they had no choice but to find Lenny not guilty.
For Lenny, the verdict was a vindication. Lenny's star was still rising when he took his act abroad for the first time in 1962. But in London, British audiences walked out on his performance. Friend Annie Ross.
A wonderful, very well-known Irish actress had gone in to see Lenny and had been so offended that she walked out, and Peter Cook was standing at the door, and he said, "Didn't you like the show?" And she took her nails and just drew blood on his face.
Trouble followed Lenny when he returned to California. On October 5th, 1962, Lenny again encountered Los Angeles Sheriff's Detective Joe Lesnick.
We were staked out on this rear door here, which went to a hobby shop. And the proprietor was selling, in addition to small cars, he was selling heroin. When lo and behold, Lenny Bruce walked up and entered the place and stayed a few minutes, and then proceeded south down the alley. And at that time we followed him in our radio car and confronted him right around here. He dropped a matchbook that we found to contain a bundle of heroin. And at that time we arrested him for possession of heroin.
Within hours, Lenny's friends helped him post bail, and Lenny was released pending trial. 3 weeks after his arrest for heroin, Lenny was busted again on obscenity charges, this time while performing at Hollywood's famed Troubadour. The arresting officer was then a vice squad deputy who later became LA County Sheriff, the late Sherman Block.
We went in and we watched his performance, and the deputy district attorney says to me, "I'm convinced it's in violation, and tomorrow morning I'll issue a complaint." And as we got to the front door, he says, "You know, it was really bad. Let's go back in and arrest him now." So we did.
Fighting obscenity charges soon became a way of life for Lenny during the 1960s. The problems that began in California quickly spread east.
He was busted in Chicago, he's busted in New York, he's busted in San Francisco and Los Angeles. What they would try to do is, of course, use the four-letter words and get him on obscenity.
In 1963, Lenny again went to England to perform. This time, even British authorities turned against him. Lenny was barred from entering England. On his return to New York, he was strip-searched by American authorities. Lenny was an outcast.
You could see the pain in his eyes, but there wasn't anything anyone could do about it.
When the True Hollywood story continues, Lenny Bruce hits rock bottom.
Lenny snapped in the New York proceeding, and he never got unsnapped.
And later, the mystery of Lenny's last bow.
Who would kill him? He was down. I mean, you kick a man when he's down, but he was so down, I don't think anybody would bother to kill him.
In the 1960s, England exported 4 British mop tops during a revolution in rock music. In 1963, England deported Lenny Bruce during a war over the use of words. Lenny was locked in a fight for his life.
He was just totally obsessed. I mean, he was a paranoid whose worst paranoid fantasies had turned out to be true.
"37-year-old Lenny Bruce cried like a baby after being tossed out of England in 1963. Lenny's fight for free speech angered public officials, and Lenny was devastated. Jazz trumpeter Jack Sheldon.
He told me that he identified with Jesus Christ as being a prophet, and he wanted to help society by showing that the words weren't bad, you know, that only violence was bad, and hurting people and being mean to people, that was the bad stuff.
Lenny's pain was evident in this 1963 interview.
Judges that make jokes with prisoners that are before them. We have a prominent one in New York. How cruel to...
By this time, Honey Bruce was gone from Lenny's life. Honey became totally dependent upon heroin and bounced between a succession of men. Lenny sought refuge in his Hollywood Hills home. Comedian Shecky Green.
Women came in and loved him. Married ladies would, go and... It's weird, I don't know what he had.
Actress Faye Dunaway came to Lenny's side. So did actress Tuesday Weld. Comic Frankie Ray.
Tuesday Weld lived down the street, and he used to leave her dead flowers every time he came up the hill. He used to leave her a bouquet of dead flowers. And she got to like him till she came over and,
But Lenny's old nemesis, Detective Joe Lesnick, was also a visitor in the spring of '63.
He wasn't home, but he'd rented or was letting a couple of hookers stay there. And we ended up arresting him. They had marijuana all over the place in plain view.
While LA cops were raiding Lenny's home, Bruce was in Miami getting busted on yet another dope charge, possessing a needle and syringe. When he returned to Los Angeles, Lenny resumed his role as a police informant, but his snitching started to get dangerous.
I told him, we never reveal the sources of our information. I said, but we're getting word back that you've told people you've turned, mentioned these people you've turned. And he says, yeah. He said, I don't care. He says, maybe, if enough of them aren't around, I'll quit using. Of course, he didn't.
In 1963, Lenny revived his old passion for filmmaking by voicing the characters in this animated short. Thank You, Masked Man was produced by John Magnuson.
Lenny was probably the most moral man I ever met in my life. Thank You, Masked Man is based on a premise of his. What if there's no more evil in the world? I know I'd be in the unemployment line behind J. Edgar Hoover and Jimmy Hoffa and the Lone Ranger.
The unemployment line became a real threat for Lenny in 1963. His comedy act was no longer getting laughs. Crescendo Club owner Gene Norman.
His mother, Sally, called me, and I really didn't want to play him anymore because he was too raw. He was mean at the end. Sally called and said, Gene, you have to play him. He loves you. He's been with you for so many years. I said, okay. So we brought him in the last time, and he really was terrible.
In April 1964, while performing in New York, Lenny was again arrested for obscenity. This time, his trial turned into a media circus. Defense attorney Martin Garbus.
It was the O.J. Simpson case of its time. It drew demonstrations in New York. The courthouse was packed. There were petitions signed.
Lenny knew an obscenity conviction in the nation's biggest city would destroy his career. He fought back furiously.
Lenny was totally consumed by the trial. He would go home to his apartment at night, and the room was just strewn with law books. And he would be showing me cases that he thought meant that his case should be dismissed.
The trial lasted 6 weeks. The verdict was guilty. Lenny was devastated.
He was a paranoid whose worst paranoid fantasies had turned out to be true. Lenny snapped in the New York proceeding, and he never got unsnapped.
Lenny appealed the conviction, but his worst fears were realized. Lenny became the comic who caused big trouble for club owners. Journalist Nat Hentoff.
He knew he had a lot of people supporting him, but that didn't do any good. He couldn't work. He couldn't work because of the conviction in New York.
Following his conviction, 39-year-old Lenny descended into the darkest period of his life. Daughter Kitty Bruce.
His last years were very, very sad. It was empty. He was robbed of his soul.
In 1966, Lenny managed to land a few gigs, but instead of performing comedy, he only ranted about his New York trial.
Find information filed on April 3rd, 1964. The defendants, Lenny Bruce and Howard L. Solomon, were charged in 2 separate counts.
His whole accent was his case. He read from the trial record because he was broken. They broke him, okay.
Lenny's bathroom became his favorite place to shoot up heroin. Bruce spent hours perched on his toilet, dictating angry letters to pal Jojo D'Amore.
Most of the dictation was done that way. It was me sitting on the bathroom floor. Well, this was upstairs. Me sitting on the bathroom floor and Lenny sitting on the toilet. And a lot of times he would be in the process of getting high.
Getting high is apparently what Lenny was doing before a friend found him August 3rd, 1966, sprawled nude on the floor. Lenny Bruce was 40 years old. He was cold, and he was dead.
There was no blood. It was just a guy asleep. I don't know who it is, but someone took the needle out of his arm.
When the True Hollywood story continues, was the death of Lenny Bruce an accident, or was it a murder?
If it was, it'll be a perfect one because nobody will ever know. And he's not going to tell you.
After years of battling the courts, the cops, and his own addictions, 40-year-old Lenny Bruce died in 1966 with a needle in his arm. Lenny's death shocked his friends and family.
I thought it was a sick joke, but I knew, my God, it was true.
On August 3rd, 1966, Lenny Bruce died a sudden, grisly death in the bathroom of his Hollywood home. Many of Lenny's friends blamed the establishment.
He saw things with very real insight and spoke frankly about them. And they killed him for it.
Some thought Lenny had taken his own life.
I would say that he was a good candidate for suicide, although that's a terrible accusation to make about anybody. He was totally unhappy the last time I dealt with him. He was a lost, confused, anxious, tense human being.
Los Angeles police and the county coroner conducted an investigation into Lenny's death. The autopsy concluded Lenny died as an accidental suicide from acute morphine poisoning. Morphine is the chemical base of heroin. Close friends said Lenny accidentally overdosed.
No doubt in mind at all. To me, it was Lenny was a glutton when it came to drugs.
Friends said Lenny was given a hot fix that day. A hot fix is a lethal dose of drugs.
Somebody I heard gave him some heroin that wasn't cut yet or something, or by mistake or what. That's the only thing I heard.
But rumors persisted that the hot fix that killed Lenny was not a mistake, that someone intentionally supplied it.
Who would kill him? He was down. I mean, you kick a man when he's down, but he was so down, I don't think anybody would bother to kill him.
In his last years, Lenny made a host of enemies in high and low places. Lenny rocked the establishment. He was also a police informant.
Well, I don't know, but if he'd turned my ass and I was in jail, I'd tell you what the motive would be. You know, it would be sayonara, sucker. You know, I went up there and did the time. Now it's your turn, and yours is going to be permanent. You know?
The sad, strange death of Lenny Bruce leaves questions without answers. Fans and friends prefer to remember Lenny as a comic genius whose life was too short. Ironically, 18 months after Lenny died, the New York obscenity conviction that destroyed him was reversed by a higher court.
He was a truth teller, but he did it in a way that was both hilarious and insightful and tremendously moving. And I think one of the things that was remarkable about Lenny was his ability to speak to the heart. And I loved him, and I miss him.